There is a lot of info out there about being a dungeon master, but not all of it is true. Because running the game means taking on more responsibility than your average player, a lot of people shy away from life behind the screen. But many of the things people are afraid of when it comes to DMing, whether before, during, or after the game, aren't as real as you might think. In this video, I want to address 6 myths about DMing and why I think they're wrong, or at least not as true as you think. DMing might not be for everyone, but hopefully after watching, you may reconsider giving it a try or come away with a different perspective. Without further ado, let's get started. Let's address the elephant in the room first. Being the DM takes more time and energy than being a player. Unless you're the type of dungeon master who can wing everything, you're going to have to spend time out of the game, writing notes, coming up with story hooks, and figuring out combat encounters. Part of running the game is taking on that extra responsibility, but the way a lot of folks talk about it, you'd think you're starting a whole nother second job. Prep can be very involved or not that much of a hassle. It just depends on how you approach it. First is the fact that there are entire adventures that are ready to run right now. There are lots of published adventure modules that you can run right out of the book. It takes a little reading, and you'll probably still have to make some modifications here and there, depending on your player's choices, but it is a lot less work than coming up with everything on your own. Even if you are coming up with your own setting and story, but maybe just need a little help, there are lots of pre-made dungeons and quests out there that you can slot into your games at a moment's notice. Second, a good chunk of my prep time for games goes into preparing maps for combat. You can shave a lot of time off by just using theater of the mind, having everyone imagine combat rather than using grids and minis. It might be less theatric, but it'll also be less time. There are also tons of resources for online maps out there if you're playing virtually. Third, even if you are homebrewing your story, the more you play, the more you'll learn what you need to prep and what you don't. Some people will spend most of their time crafting detailed cities and governments, creating the world of the adventure, but leaving the actual storytelling for the table, coming up with plot points on the fly. Others, like me, prefer to plan out their combat encounters, while some DMs just have a general idea of what monsters might work and roll with it. You might find that having more material prepared makes you feel better equipped to go off script when needed. Again, like me. Or you might discover that having less planned frees you up to better fit your ideas to those of your players. The more sessions you get under your belt, the better you'll understand exactly where to focus your prep so it's a little less time consuming. Lastly, contrary to popular belief, prep can be fun. In case you can't tell, I do a lot of prep for my games. Honestly, I could stand to follow my own advice sometimes. I won't pretend that I'm always super excited to write down notes and plan for my next session, but I do love world building, encounter creation, story planning, all the little nuts and bolts of running the game. So when I'm motivated, I do a lot, and when I'm not feeling it, I do just what I need to feel ready. So give it a try. You may just love the creative process, and even if you don't, there are plenty of less time-intensive options out there. One image people have of dungeon masters is as the keepers of the rules. People picture DMs with encyclopedic knowledge of the game, able to recall any rule at will, and judge each situation fairly and correctly. It's true that as the DM, you have the final say on any rulings that come up during the game, but you absolutely do not need to memorize every rule to run a session. Learning to make rulings on the fly is way more important to DMing than knowing every nitty-gritty rule. Of course, you should still read them and try to understand the rules, but you can get very far knowing how to call for skill checks and having a DM screen cheat sheet that explains conditions and actions and things like that. When I first started playing, I didn't even own the player's handbook or the dungeon master's guide. I only had the little rule book that comes in the starter kit and what I learned from actual plays. Having everything memorized is not a requirement for being a dungeon master. And better yet, the burden of knowing the rules doesn't have to fall on only your shoulders. Most players, at least the ones I want to play with, don't expect you to know every spell and each bylaw of D&D. In fact, more experienced players can absolutely help you when you misremember a rule or have to make a call and aren't sure what might be right. For character creation, there's nothing wrong with asking the party to handle making and running their characters. You might want to peek at their character sheets just in case, but they can be just as involved in remembering the rules as you. But most importantly, you're absolutely 100% going to make mistakes. I forget or flub rules all the time. It happens even after years of playing. Don't keep yourself from getting behind the screen because you're afraid that you won't know all the rules or that you'll mess up. Screwing up, learning from the mistake, and trying again are a part of learning any skill, DMing included. And if you're really stuck, you can always just Google it. That's what I always do. When people think of DMs, a lot of folks imagine someone sitting behind a screen, moving around, doing voices, and chewing up the scenery. And I mean, yeah, there are plenty of DMs out there that are great at improv and do legitimately good accents. But role-playing is a lot more than just adopting a funny voice, and you absolutely don't have to be a great actor to DM. What's more important than having crazy acting chops is learning to make different characters feel distinct. You can make your NPCs feel wildly different with nothing but word choice, speech patterns, and how fast or slow you're talking. Having characters with different values and motivations will also help keep them distinct in your players' heads. An NPC who only cares about gold will come off very differently than one who's always thinking of others, even if they sound the same. You don't even have to roleplay in the first person if you're not comfortable with it. Lots of groups, including mine, started out in third person, simply describing what characters say or do rather than speaking it out word for word. And some groups stick with it. There's no right or wrong way to roleplay, as long as everyone is having fun. That's not to say there's no skill involved with it. Staying in character and learning how to react to what your players are saying or doing on the fly does take practice, but you don't have to go to Juilliard to be a DM. Along with being an actor, a lot of people assume you also need to be an amazing writer to run a game of D&D. It's true that having a background in creative writing and storytelling will certainly help you take the plunge into DMing, but you don't need to be a published author or serious writer to craft compelling adventures for the tabletop. First off, like I mentioned before, there is a wealth of pre-written adventures out there. From entire campaigns to single one-shots, there are lots of quests that you can pick up and run right now without ever having to grab a pen. You could maybe even find some of those on this channel, just saying. But the adventures you write for D&D don't need to be crazy complex and elaborate. In fact, when you're first starting out, the simpler the quest, the better. Having your players delve into a dungeon, fight some bandits, and explore haunted graveyards can be just as fun as stories that span multiple planes and involve layered, insane plots. A lot of the fun of D&D comes with presenting your players with a scenario and seeing what crazy solutions they use to overcome it. That doesn't change if the adventure you've given them is a simple one, like getting through a forest or exploring a kobold's den. A lot of people also think that your D&D adventures need to be completely original, that unless you're subverting expectations and challenging your players' sense of morality, they're going to be bored. I honestly don't think that could be further from the truth. A lot of people play D&D because they want that sense of fantasy adventure that they get from the books, movies, and video games that they love. So let them slay orcs, adopt goblins, and visit taverns. Those experiences are considered classic D&D for a reason. That's not to say there's no place for complex or original stories in D&D. Of course there is. And the more you practice and learn what you and your players both enjoy, the more complicated you can make your plots and world. But starting simple is perfectly fine too. And there's nothing wrong with drawing inspiration from the stories and worlds that you love. Classics can be just as fun too. Sorry, this one actually is true. It just comes with the job. But to be more serious, a lot of people assume that when you DM, you're going to be footing the bill for a lot of gear. Miniatures, books, subscriptions, a DM screen. The list goes on and on of all the things people assume you need to run the game. But whether you're playing in person or online, there are tons of resources out there that are totally free. You don't have to buy any of the books to play. Wizards of the Coast provides all of the basic rules online for free, as well as a bunch of monster stat blocks to get you started. If you want to make just one purchase, there are starter kits that come with rules and a ready-to-run adventure that make jumping in really easy. Even things like the Player's Handbook and Dungeon Master's Guide aren't essential. Like I said earlier, I didn't own either when I started. For combat, I've already mentioned Theater of the Mind, but even if you want to play with a map and physical setup, there are lots of ways to do it on the cheap. You can, for example, hand-draw maps or use a simple grid. Or you can buy a dry erase map for fight after fight with just one purchase. Instead of individual minis, you can find things around your home to use as stand-ins, or get creative and make your own. One of my favorite ways to run combat used to be using chess pieces. There are two colors, so it's really easy to tell who's fighting for which side, and you can make different enemy types different pieces. You don't even have to buy dice if you don't want to. There are free online rollers that'll do it all virtually. DMing does not have to break the bank. But be warned, once you buy one mini, you will buy more. It's just how it goes. Because the DM is the one making rulings and leading the action at the table, a lot of folks assume that it's on the DM to become the group leader. People think that to be a dungeon master, you have to always schedule the sessions, solve every problem your friends have with each other, forever control how the story goes, and above all else, cater to the whim of your players. And look, there is some truth to this. The DM does feel like a natural leader of the group, and there probably will be times when you'll have to take on a bit more responsibility for what's happening at the table. But you are not solely responsible for everyone's fun. If all of your players are having a great time, but you hate the game you're running, something is wrong. You and your players should all be enjoying the story that you're crafting together. That means your players should be respectful of both your time and effort that you put in. If you've all chosen to play a grim, dark, death-filled game, they shouldn't show up with characters who are all sunshine and rainbows. That's just disrespectful. That goes for coordinating the game too. It's not too much to ask that others help when it comes to picking what day you'll play each week or figuring out who's bringing snacks this time. If you play in person and need help setting up or cleaning when the game is finished, the whole party should be pitching in. And when there is conflict at the table, out of character fights, not in character, while you can certainly try to help mediate things, you don't have to be the solver of all problems. It's on your friends to talk things out and move forward too. DMing comes with an extra layer of responsibility. There's no getting around it. But you're still a player too. Your fun is just as important as the rest of the groups. And when you sit down to play, running the game really does become a team effort. So don't shy away from the screen because you're afraid of boring everyone or getting stuck carrying the weight of expectations. Just get out there and start rolling. Those are 6 myths about DMing and why I think they're either outright wrong or at least greatly exaggerated. DMing is a challenge, but in life, nothing worth doing is easy. It takes practice and patience, but with time, drive, and plenty of critical failures, you can be as great of a DM as any other. And you'll probably have lots of fun along the way too. Thank you so much for watching the video. If you enjoyed it or found it helpful, I'd appreciate it if you'd leave a like. And if you enjoyed it so much you want to see even more, consider subscribing to the Bard's College. I make videos about D&D, DMing, and everything in between. So if you liked what you saw, stick around. But for now, good luck, and remember, crit your players.